Hello and welcome. My name is Julie Wilcox. I'm Director of Recruitment and Retention for the College of Education, Health and Human Services. And we're here today to learn about undergraduate student research. And I'm going to kick it on over to Dr. Jajtner, and he's going to talk to you all about that.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to take the opportunity here to kind of share a little bit about what we do with undergraduate student research in the exercise science program. And specifically, I'm going to talk about what we do in my lab, just because that's what I have more experience with. So before we get started, I do want to talk a little bit about my experience with undergraduate research. So when I was an undergraduate student, I was on the swim team at my university, and I was working with the exercise science program coordinator, who also happened to be my coach, while he was finishing up a project looking at exercise efficiency with different stroke lengths while swimming. And so when I was the student researcher, I was the lucky person that got to push this cart back and forth on the pool deck for literally about 25 miles over the course of the entire study. But it really gave me an insight into what research was all about, and how we go about generating knowledge that can be used to, in our case, improve sport performance and improve coaching outcomes. So a little bit about me. I'm an assistant professor currently in the exercise science program. I teach two different undergraduate courses, physiology of exercise, and then the individual investigation, which is our research-based course that two of our three different concentrations require for graduation. The two labs that I do most of my work in is going to be the exercise performance and recovery lab, which is pictured up here on the top, and the exercise biochemistry and immunology lab, which is pictured on the bottom there with two of our graduate students. So a little bit about my research and what I all do. My main area of focus is exercise immunology and inflammation. So basically, how does exercise impact immunology and or your immune function? And most of what we do is basically we have people come on in, do different types of workouts, and then we monitor how the immune system is responding to that workout. So some examples here, my dissertation, we looked at how resistance exercise changes immune cell behavior and how the immune system is involved in repair following a resistance exercise bout. We just finished up a project in our lab where we were looking at different types of training interventions, aerobic training interventions, looking at high intensity intervals versus just regular long, slow distance training, and seeing how the immune system responds to that. So what we do is we have people come on in, work out, and then we take their blood and we analyze their blood. So a lot of people will ask, okay, what can students all do while participating in the research? And what people can all do is really, the sky's kind of the limit when it comes to what students can all do during research. So that will range from assisting with the data acquisition, like in our middle picture up there on the top, to helping us perform some of the pilot testing over on the left, to processing some of the blood samples that we collect following the exercise intervention on the right, all the way to actually presenting the research at university conferences, regional conferences. We've even had some undergraduate students go to some national conferences with us, and we'll kind of show you that here in a little bit. So really, the sky's kind of the limit with what students can all do in the lab and do with research, and it is very beneficial. Okay. Now, when it comes to working with students, the one thing that personally I like to keep in mind when I'm working with students is students are always still learning, and we're all still learning. I think one of the best things that you get from engaging in research as an undergraduate student is you'll learn more from doing something wrong just one time than you will by doing it correctly 100 times. And engaging in the student research gives you those opportunities to learn those lessons and to get that experience doing these different techniques that you'll use out in the field. So I've got a couple examples here that I want to kind of highlight. So over here, we have a woman doing a VO2 max test, and she's wearing a mouthpiece. And one of the first things that we're going to learn how to do as students is how to put together one of those mouthpieces. And it sounds simple, but you'd be amazed how technical it actually can get sometimes. And there was one day where I was working with someone and we just could not figure out what was going on. And we just didn't have the mouthpiece put together correctly. And I can tell you firsthand that myself and that student, we've never made that mistake again in anything that we've done while putting together the mouthpiece or conducting research with that. So, having those opportunities really do help. And one of the concerns that I've found that a lot of students have with getting engaged in research is they don't want to make the mistakes. And what I would urge you is it's going to happen. And so that's my other example over here on the right is we were doing some work in the lab, and some of my more experienced graduate students just made one simple mistake, and it ended up costing us the entire day working on things. So, these kinds of things happen. It's part of the process, and it's part of the learning process. And again, you'll learn more from doing one thing wrong than you will by doing it correctly 100 times. So I think it's something that's very important for students to do to get into these labs, get the experience, and make the mistakes periodically. But that's how we learn. So the other reasons that I'm very interested in student research and I like to promote it is there's a lot of important aspects that come from it. So we've talked a little bit about more experience already, but you also want to take into account the different personal connections that you can make, as well as some of the extra opportunities that you might experience along the way. So I'm going to dive into these each a little bit more in detail. So when we look at the different experiences, within my lab, we do a lot of different types of testing. We will do aerobic testing like we have all the way to the left. We'll do muscle function testing in the middle. We do wet lab work where we're going to be analyzing blood. And we just do straight workouts as well with people. And all of those things are they're going to be skills that students can develop during their time in college. But when you're working in a traditional class, you don't necessarily have the opportunities to get involved in that nearly to the level as you do if you get involved in the research. The next reason is going to be the personal connections that you can make. Now, this is a personal connection that you can make with the faculty member that runs the lab, with graduate students that work within the lab. All of those will be very valuable to you in the future for a lot of different reasons. Okay, one, you get to talk shop with your faculty or the graduate students, and from personal experience, I learned so much more by just having conversations with my coach, who was my professor, than I did by sitting in the classes. I learned so much more by just, working with him in the lab, being able to ask questions and really have that, for me, it was a one-on-one situation. And so, I learned a lot from that. And secretly, we all do like to talk shop. So, it's one of those things that we all enjoy doing, and students will get a lot out of that. It also can set you up with a lot of external connections. So why this is important One of the students that I had working in my lab last year, she was working on her. She was a double major in exercise science and nutrition, and she was working or getting ready to do her dietetic internship. And she wanted to continue with some research. It just so happened that the university that she was interested in going to for a dietetic internship was also the same university that the person I graduated with my PhD with was also working. So, that's an external connection. So now she's able to continue her research and continue that process, even though she's no longer at Kent and she's, out and pursuing the rest of her degree. So those external connections are also very important. And when you get more involved with research, that can be very helpful. The last, references. You always want to keep that in mind as well. No matter what you do, when you leave the university, people are going to be asking for references. And it says a lot when a faculty member can write a very personal reference for you. But if all you're going to do is just sit in a classroom, there's 25, 30, sometimes 50, sometimes 100 students in there. When you get into the lab, then the professors really get to know you. We get to work with you, and we're able to really help you out with those references as well, because we actually know you, right? We've had the opportunity to work with you for a long time. So that's another one that's very important. And the last thing I want to talk about is just going to be the extra opportunities that you get from being involved in student research. So all of these pictures are undergraduate students and some of the graduate students that have been working in my lab at different conferences that we went to in Orlando and Washington, D.C. last year. And you can see that, yes, we do present our research, and that's the purpose for going, but we also get a chance to get around and see the city. And so you also get those opportunities as well. Also, we look up on the top right, there's other opportunities at the university, including the opportunity to compete for, different prizes for the 3-minute thesis. There's scholarship opportunities with it. So there's a lot more opportunities that are open to students that are interested in pursuing student research than just sitting in classrooms. So with that, I'd like to just take any questions that anybody might have.
All right, thank you very much. So we have one question. Do I have to do research in order to graduate?
That is going to depend on the program that you are in, and more specifically, the concentration that you're in as well. If you are in, I can speak to exercise science, the exercise science program. If you are in our pre-PT, OT, AT track, and our exercise physiology track, you will be required to do the individual investigation. If you are in our exercise specialist, you are not required to do the individual investigation.
So on top, just another question going on that. So it might not be research and you don't do the individual investigation, but I believe all three do require a field experience practicum. So they have to go out and do practicum internship. Would you, even though it's not required of the exercise specialist, can you talk about what they might get out of that beyond, obviously all the things you already talked about, but have you had some of those exercise specialists do some individual faculty, research, before they went and did their cardiac rehab internship or, other internships that they've had?
I have had some students that were exercise specialists that did work in the lab. And one of the things that I think that they'll get most out of it is going to be the hands-on experience. In the classroom, you're doing a lot more, basic understanding and theoretical knowledge. but in the lab, you get to get your hands dirty. You actually get to go do the do the analyses that you're learning about.
Mhm.
And a lot of our classes have lab components as well. But again, it's still very different when you're working in a lab of 10 to 15 students to going in working with your faculty as well. The other thing that it's going to help with is it also helps with problem solving, because whenever we're putting together research projects, we have to go through a series of pilot tests, and we pilot test for a reason, because there's always something that goes wrong when you pilot test, and so you have to think through those different problems, and so that's another aspect of research that's very beneficial.
Thank you. So a couple different questions. One is, how early can I start doing research with a faculty member? And the other is, will it help me get into graduate school if that's the
Okay.
route I'm going?
All right, so I'm going to start with how early can you start? So really, it's going to be faculty dependent. I can speak for myself. I won't turn somebody away if they're interested in getting involved. But the one thing that everybody always has to understand is when we do our work in the lab, it's not that we want to set up a hierarchy, but certain techniques require a lot more experience to do. And so, you're not necessarily going to be able to do those right up front. But, you continue to work at it, and then eventually you will develop that experience, and then you will be able to be doing some of those more in-depth analyses in the wet lab, especially. And one of the reasons I would encourage students to get involved a little bit earlier is because it gives you the time to get that experience, and then you would be able to be doing those more in-depth analyses. So yeah, I would say start early, because it does help with what you will all be able to do by the time you're done. Now, whether or not it helps getting into grad school, I'd say yes, it helps you get into grad school. If nothing else, it shows graduate schools that you have an interest in research. You weren't somebody that just went through school just going to classes, and shows that you're a little bit more invested in what you're doing and what you're learning to do. So yes, it will help with graduate school applications.
Thank you very much. Now, you mentioned a couple different times the wet lab. I believe that means that you draw blood and do some analysis with blood. So I know that's something that I participated in, a couple of things that exercise science majors were doing, particularly the faculty wellness. So I got my blood drawn and all that fun stuff. And yeah, that was one thing I was actually surprised that it was right there. I thought I was going to go get my blood drawn at the health center and then they would get the results or that sort of thing. And they're like, oh no, we're doing it right here. I'm like, oh, so had no idea that that was part of, I learn something every time I walk into the exercise science lab. So I like to just kind of go down there and see who's around, which I have to say, doing recruitment, when I go in, you guys are always amazing at talking to students, and as well as there's always something going on, which I think is exciting. So for those of you who are watching this, that is definitely there's a lot of activity that goes on. There's always people around, there's always research, there's always, an active group of people to work with, which is great. So
yeah, we do our best to stay busy.
Yeah.
And we have been successful with that recently.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, and there's lots of, can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the research projects that, or not sure projects, but some of the skills that the students just starting out, like things they could do in the lab as a first year student? Or I know I did data entry a lot, like I observed and took notes. In the beginning, that's really, I was just there. I know when I was doing my, initial kinds of things, but you still learn a lot because you're in the room. So.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it would work. It works with us as well. Is we start off with data entry, and really writing our notes. That's where we start off, because you're right. You're there. You're watching everything. You're learning. You're kind of learning it through observation. But I also don't want to minimize that work. That is extremely important work. When we do our data entry, we make everybody do it twice, and then we have a second person do it because it is that important, to make sure that it does get done correctly. So it's not like we're giving menial tasks just because that's, we want to impose that hierarchy. It's just, everything that we're doing is very important. And we have to make sure that the training is matching what we're asking you to do. And so that's what we're going for with that. Some of the other things that we have our students do is labeling tubes. So every time we draw blood, we have to store the blood, and so we have to label tubes. And again, as I always tell all the students, that is probably the most important job that we do, because we collect it now, we don't necessarily analyze it for another 6 months to a year, and if we don't know what you wrote, we wasted everything, right? So it is a very important task as well. But that's where we start off, and then we start moving into spotting technique, or spotting if we're doing a weight training program. We'll go into conducting a VO2 max test, first under the supervision of faculty or graduate students. Conducting a 1RM test, aliquoting or processing the blood samples. And then eventually, if you've been around long enough and you've passed all the different tests that we have in place, then potentially actually running some of the wet lab analyses, actually, performing some of the procedures in the wet lab. So, it's one of those things. It's not. We don't really care what level in school somebody is. It's what their experience is doing the tasks that we are doing in the lab.
Thank you. You also had mentioned that you've gone to conferences and taken some students. I'm assuming that they maybe helped you present at those conferences and that they were part of the research.
Yeah. So we have, so far, I've had 3 undergraduate students present at national level conferences. 3. Sorry, 3 have presented at national level conferences. We had 2 more that were going to be going to San Francisco with us this May, but obviously that is not the case anymore. But yes, so when those students go, in my cases, those students have actually had their own posters that they've been presenting off of some of the data that we collected on some of the projects that they were working on. So they would go, they put the poster up just like everybody else, and they get asked the questions, and they get to interact with some of the bigwigs in the field. Actually, kind of a funny story. Last year in Orlando, one of our students, she was one of our undergrad students, she actually had her poster put literally right next to the biggest name in exercise immunology in the world. And so, but she ended up with an hour and a half to just sit and, when people weren't at her poster, talk to the biggest name in the field. So, so was an awesome opportunity for her as well. So a little nerve-wracking from what I was told, but an awesome opportunity.
That's amazing. And that's the kind of stuff that I know when I do recruitment. I can tell students, please get involved in research, but hearing it from you and talking, I'm not in the lab. So, hearing it from an actual faculty member is amazing. So thank you for doing this. We have one more question, and that is, what kind of jobs do people get from the lab experiences? And have you had, I know that a lot of the students that are going into exercise science, a lot of them think they're going into PT, OT, maybe podiatric medicine, athletic training. Can they go into research?
Absolutely, they can go into research. I mean, I went into research, so yeah, that's definitely something that people can do. There are research firms that are out there. We have the Cleveland Clinic right around here, so they all have research labs, and they do hire in research techs if that's something that you're interested in doing. If you're really interested in research itself, it is going to be something where you're going to want to move into a graduate program in your field. Because if you're just a lab tech, you are a lab tech, you're just running the analyses. You're not, you're not doing the empirical work that goes along with research, like the presenting at conferences and things like that. If you're just a lab tech, you are a lab tech. You're working in the lab, and not doing all of the other tasks as well. So if you're interested in doing research, yes, it's definitely a field you can get into. And to do that, you would want to move into a master's program and then a PhD program in your field.
And we happen to have it at Kent State for exercise physiology.
Yep.
If they wanted to stay with exercise physiology, I know some students have gone on and done different research kinds of opportunities, but I'm assuming that exercise science is a really good background for all of those graduate programs, or a lot of them.
Well, so actually, two of my first students that I had my first year at Kent, because this is just finishing up my fourth year at Kent. My first year at Kent, I had two students that were in a couple of the classes that I taught, then also did the individual investigation with me. And actually, both students ended up sticking around doing their masters with me, and they are now both working on their PhDs. One of them is down at Florida State looking at muscle physiology and actually doing work with how alcohol consumption influences muscle physiology. And I mean, he's telling me about some of the work that he's doing, and it's awesome what he's all doing down there. And then the other one is out at the University of Oregon doing some more of the same of what we're already doing here, but a little bit more in depth. So more in depth in I shouldn't say more in depth, but in a little bit different of a direction. So he's dealing with more environmental work and inflammation. So we focus a little bit more on the immunology. They focus a little bit more on the inflammation. So so yeah, that's where two of our students that have actually done just this. They got involved in their individual investigation, decided to stick around for their masters, and ended up going from there. And I will add that if you want to go into research as a potential career path, you really do need to get involved in this early, because you have to learn whether or not it is something you really want to do, because there are days where you don't necessarily want to keep doing it, and so you have to really know that this is what you want to do. So get involved early for two reasons. One, get to know what you want, get to know that you want to do it. But two, if you have the research experience as an undergrad, it is going to set you apart tenfold when you go to apply for graduate assistantships for your master's program and your PhD program. And graduate assistantships are incredible to have. You can get your tuition paid for, you get a small stipend. So it is very good for you if you can get those. And this really does set you apart for that.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, this was very educational for me. I know I've done quite a few of these, I guess, videos that we've been doing now that we are all not in person. So instead of being able to bring them to your lab, which I hope that soon we will all be able to come and see the lab, For those students who are tuning in who haven't seen the lab, I geek out every time I go. Thank you for doing this. I always learn something, and I don't see any other questions for now. If students do want to get a hold of you, we will obviously post this, and your email is on the presentation, I do believe, and I will put it in the message. Yeah, so.
If students want to see the lab, we do also have different lab web pages on the exercise science page. So if you're interested in any of the labs, and don't just look at mine. We have 5 faculty in the program. We all do very different things. And I understand that my area of research is not it's not everybody's cup of tea. So, find what it is that you want to do. And we've got a wide variety of faculty interests in the lab. So take a look at the XPhys program page, and you'll be able to find the different research labs there.
Putting that in the presentation right now, so it'll be there. If anyone's watching this, it's going to be in the chat. But yeah, definitely, we hope to see you in person soon, and have our students in the fall all come into your lab and say they saw this and want to work with you. So thank you so much for doing this.
Perfect.
I will have us sign off for now, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks,
all right,
everybody.
We'll talk to you all later.